For my final project this semester, I've decided to go over dangerous cults in United States history. Each point in this presentation is sorted based on the day each cult was founded. Before starting, I'd like to do a small overview of this topic. First, I want to go over the difference between cults and New Age religions. Both have the same denotative meaning. A religious group, often living together, whose beliefs are considered extreme or strange by many people. And that's from Cambridge Dictionary. However, they do have different connotative meanings. Cult is a negative connotation that is typically associated with a dangerous or extremist group that is known for abusing members, and they typically are centralized around a strong, charismatic leader, and they typically spread beliefs that are genuinely harmful. Meanwhile, New Age religions they have a more neutral connotation and refer to any small religious movement. Most New Age religions are not harmful and do not mistreat members. Another way to look at this is that all cults are New Age religions, but not all New Age religions are cults. Part 2. I will use the word cult many times in this project, so I want to make sure that you understand how I'm using the term. When I say the word cult, I mean a group that is centered around a charismatic, strong leader that takes advantage of or harms its members in some way, and this includes brainwashing, abuse, manipulation, and through like isolation. And it may spread ideas that are genuinely harmful. And I don't mean like small things, I mean like beliefs that cannot be excused but as tradition. And this includes like racism, anti Semitism, sexism, or any other extreme hate that cannot be excused because of religious treatment. And now, finally, I want to go over potential biases. In my research, I've learned about the anti cult movement that formed in response to New Age religions. And its like main priority at the time was to prove that all New Age religions were dangerous and brainwashing members, and so they conducted research on many ex-members of these religions in order to prove this. However, their research is flawed and pretty biased, and it doesn't really capture the full picture. So, because of that, some of the information within this project might be skewed just from that influence of that movement. And I will do my best to present the most accurate and unbiased information I can, but it is important to understand that this is a complicated subject and I can never know for sure. This subject, it deals with human psychology and behavior and like the effects of manipulation, and all of which isn't fully understood. So, with that out of the way, let's get to this project. The first cult on this list is the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or FLDS. It was officially founded in 1952, but its origins can be traced back to when the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints renounced polygamy in 1890. the church excommunicated those who continued to practice polygamy. One group of these excommunicated individuals eventually came together under their founder, Leroy S. Johnson, to form the FLDS. And so the current leader is Warren Jeffs, and that is who I will be referring to as the leader for the rest of this point. This group mostly practices basic Mormon beliefs as well as polygamy. And on its own, neither of these things are necessarily bad. However, when you look at the stuff that was going on, you think, ugh. So first, this group was like incredibly like sexist and racist. Just a quote from Warren Jeffs himself, which is actually he's pictured right here. Just to quote these are some things he said. So first, on black people, he said, it was necessary that the devil should have representation upon the earth as well as God. So Ham's wife that was preserved on the ark was a Negro of the seed of Cain, and there was a priestly purpose in it, that the devil would have a representation as well as God. So the Negro race has continued, and today is the day of the Negro as far as the world is concerned. They have influenced the generations of time. They have mixed their blood with many peoples until there are many peoples not able to hold priesthood. Which is kind of insane to say. And then on marriage, he said, many young men, when they receive their first wife, are just so untrained. The woman, if she's not careful, will be overbearing and always ask permission for what she wants. And ladies, build up your husbands by being submissive. That's how you'll give your children success. You will want your children to be obedient, to be submissive, to righteous living. So, yeah. And we're going to come back to the next point in a second, because I want to really quick say that these beliefs have led it to be designated as a hate group. Now, looking back at the previous point, is child marriage. It was extremely common. Girls as young as 13 or 14 would be married off to men 3 times their age. And so it comes as no surprise that in 2006, the FBI arrested Warren Jeffs after his name was on the top 10 most wanted list. His charges included sexual assault of minors, including his own daughter, and as well as for facilitating child marriages. He remains in prison to this day, and he continues to preach from there as well, which is crazy. And this is him. These are 17 of his wives, which is only a small portion of how many he had. And if I saw this man like across the street, I would probably run away. So I'm glad he's in prison, and I hope he rots there. Of course, the next cult to discuss is Scientology. Please don't sue me. So it was founded by L. Ron Hubbard, as you can see, this great man, in 1953. Their beliefs are complicated. However, there is someone, or I guess, like, people who explain it very well. And that's South Park. So I'm going to click on this link, but I'm going to pause the recording first because it will show an ad and I don't want to make you watch that. So I'll be right back. Okay. I also skipped ahead a little bit because, like, the first 30 seconds are kind of just filler. Scientologist belief. So let me go back to my slideshow. And then let me go back to my slideshow. There we go. Now, it's not necessarily these beliefs that make Scientology so controversial. It's more of the fact that it's like, and I mean like extremely pay to play. And I don't just mean like, you know, them passing around the donation little basket during Sunday service, and, you know, Bob and Janet give you a dirty look for only putting a $5 bill in there. It's much more than that. Just as an example, if you wanted to reach clear, which is like a level of spirituality in the religion, you can expect to pay anywhere from $50,000 to $130,000 in sessions. Don't mind my mom if you can hear her in the background. Reaching higher levels costs even more, like 200,000, like, plus. And on top of all that, you have the church, who is always constantly asking for donations or asking for you to buy this or that. I mean, this picture right here is for a magazine that they wanted you to pay like $15 for. Another thing that's kind of controversial about it is its response to anything that's like controversial, like anyone like writes that's like negative at all or like not like completely positive. Here is a leaked letter that Hubbard sent. This is him himself. This is what he's saying. This is how he says you should deal with journalists or investigators. This is the correct procedure. 1. Spot who is attacking us. 2. Start investigating them promptly for felonies or worse using our own professionals, not outside agencies. 3. Double curve our reply by saying we welcome an investigation of them. 4. Start feeding lurid, blood, sex, crime, actual evidence on the attackers to the press. Don't ever tamely submit to an investigation of us. Make it rough. Rough on attackers all the way. You can get reasonable about it and lose. Sure, we break no laws. Sure, we have nothing to hide. But attackers are simply anti-Scientology propaganda agency so far as we are concerned. They have proven they want no facts and will only lie no matter what they discover. So banish all ideas that any fair hearing is intended and start our attack with their first breath. Never wait. Never talk about us, only them. Use their blood, sex, crime to get headlines. Don't use us. This method of like forced censorship really does not paint Scientology in a good light, and this only really scratches the surface of the rabbit hole known as Scientology, and I strongly encourage you to do your own research on this phenomenon. And our next cult is People's Temple. It was founded in 1955 by Jim Jones, which is this one right here. And it was based on a mixture of Christianity and Marxism, and they also believed that a nuclear apocalypse was imminent, and that they needed to escape the nuclear fallout. And so it was founded in Indiana, but Jones and many members moved to a commune in um, Guyana in 1974. In part because of Jones's growing paranoia about living in the United States. However, so it was named Jonestown, and it was advertised as a socialist utopia for members of the church. But things didn't really work out that way. The amount of people moving to the commune surpassed how much you could handle, and food just could not be produced fast enough to feed the 1,000 residents. And meanwhile, Jones had been growing more paranoid and more abusive. He actually developed multiple like sexual relationships with different members, including some homosexual relationships, and members who refused his advances would be threatened and maybe even targeted by other members. Members who expressed desire to leave were also threatened, and their children were threatened. And defectors, like people who try to escape, they would actually search like the rainforest surrounding them or the nearby like airport or anything like that to see if they could find any defectors because they did not want anyone leaving. But the People's Temple is most famous for the events of November 18th, 1978. A few days prior, a congressman by the name of Leo Joseph Ryan Jr., along with a group of reporters, had traveled to Jonestown in response to concerned messages from family members of those who left for Jonestown. Congressman Ryan, who was scheduled to leave on the 18th, was approached by a group of members who asked to leave with him. Because of the additional members, they needed to call an additional plane. And this took some time. The first plane boarded relatively with no issue. However, just moments after leaving the ground, one of the members on board, or individuals on board, was actually secretly working for Jones and began shooting everyone on the plane, including the pilot. And meanwhile, the other plane that was still boarding was ambushed by a group of soldiers from Jonestown that also began shooting them. Everyone, including Congressman Ryan, were killed. Meanwhile, Jones, he called all of his members, which was a little over 900 at the time, and instructed them to all drink a Kool-Aid that was laced with cyanide. All of the members were surrounded by armed guards, which basically pressured them to drink it, because it was either drink and die or be shot and die. And most members drank it voluntarily, but reportedly there were at least 70 individuals who had injection scars on their arms, meaning that they could very well have been injected forcefully. Every member who was there died that day, and this includes Jones, who was found with a gunshot wound to the head that was most likely self-inflicted. During investigations, investigators found a tape that actually recorded the event, and I'm going to read out a bit of what was just said at the end of the tape, but I would encourage you to go listen or read the whole thing, but I should warn you, it's very disturbing. Can someone please assure these children of the relaxation of stepping over to the next plane, that set an example for others. You set 1,000 people who say, "We don't like the way the world is. Take our life from us. We laid it down. We got tired." We didn't commit suicide. We committed an act of revolutionary suicide, protesting the conditions of an inhumane world. He said this as children were dying, as parents were watching as the drink that they gave their kid was killing them, while they were also starting to feel the effects of the poison from the cyanide, which is pretty despicable, in my opinion. Especially knowing that there were children there who did not have a choice and who never chose to be part of this cult. Moving on from that, we have the Branch Davidians. It was founded by Benjamin Roden in 1955, but its most notable leader is David Koresh. And the story of how he actually took over the cult is very interesting, but it's also long, and I don't really have time to go over it. So, really, to put it simply, he took control after the previous leader, George Roden, was found to be criminally insane. So, the Branch Davidians were mainly centered around Christianity and, of course, the idea that the end times were coming. Koresh himself, he saw himself as a martyr who would eventually die defending the cult. He prophesied. The issue is that he was also a pedophile and a sex addict. He reportedly had over 19 wives, some of which were underage. All of the women who were part of the cult had to give Koresh open access to their bodies, which I don't like to say. Then on February 28th, 1993, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, attempted to use a search and arrest warrant in response to allegations of Koresh stockpiling guns and controlled substances. And this led to a 51-day shootout between the Branch Davidians, the ATF, and later the FBI. And then on April 19th, 1993, a fire broke out at the compound that the Branch Davidians were in during the shootout. And most people who were inside the building ended up dying, including David Koresh. And the official cause is listed as a mass suicide caused by Koresh. However, many experts believe that it may have at least partly been caused by the FBI, which isn't, as horrible as it is, isn't necessarily like too out there. And the thing is that, like, there's no doubt that Koresh was a horrible person, but the other members, a lot of them were innocent and did not deserve to die like that. So, I mean, either way it happened, but it would be pretty wrong no matter who started it. Next up is the Sullivanians. This is actually an interesting cult because it started off as a therapy organization. It was founded by Saul B. Newton here in 1957. The beliefs of this cult um, are kind of less like religion based, and more kind of counterculture based, I would say. There was polyamory, like I said, counterculture, kind of going against the norm, and psychoanalysis, which was a big part of, I would almost say, their um, way of expressing their spirituality. Um, it really was hard on polygamy or polyamory, polygamy, and sexual freedom. However, and you'll see this a lot with some of these later sex cults, telling people you can have sex whenever you want is in itself not bad. But when it turns to telling people you have to have sex with other members or else, that's when it starts getting bad. Um, and so there was a lot of sexual abuse going on. Not only that, but the therapist, because remember, this was originally a therapy organization, therapists often use their positions of power to control um, their patients' lives, including what they were allowed to do, what they were allowed to work, what their haircut was allowed to be, who they were allowed to date and marry, and who they were allowed to have sex with. Um, it it's not like the worst cult on this list, but it still, you know, has like sexual abuse and stuff. Um, Unfortunately, there was not too much information, or at least the information that was there was behind a paywall. But um, as far as I'm aware, it does not exist today. Oh. Next up on this list is, I hope I'm saying this right, Synanon. I've been struggling to say this since I started researching it. And it was founded by this guy, Charles Dedrick, in 1958. And it actually started off as a drug rehabilitation group. Dedrick was a former Alcoholics Anonymous member that believed that the best way to get others to quit was through what you call tough love. Um, they would have basically these sessions. It was very similar to an Alcoholics Anonymous session, except instead of the person speaking, getting words of like encouragement or um, like pity or something like that, they would basically get bullied and mocked and told how worthless they are. And it surprisingly did work. And because of that, a lot of people looked at Dedrick and saw him basically as their savior because he was the only one who was able to get them off of these drugs. Um, However, as more people began, following Synanon, um, Dedrick would become more and more like a dictator. So he, for one, he he established Synanon as like a religion, and then used those funds himself and not actually for Synanon. So basically embezzlement. And then at the same time, he also created a group within Synanon called the Imperial Marines, which basically he used to control members and go after defectors. He was also just overall very controlling of members. Um, in fact, in 1978, he and his like Imperial Marines actually put a rattlesnake into the mailbox of a lawyer who was working on a lawsuit against Sinanon, and the lawyer survived, and he ended up getting Dedrick ended up actually getting arrested for this. He ended up being sentenced to 5 years probation, as well as he was forbidden from like leading Sinanon anymore. And then Sinanon itself was officially dissolved in 1991, in marking the end of this cult. Next up is a much more infamous cult, the Manson family. It was founded in 1967 by Charles Manson. And like many other cults, they believed in doomsday. Except that Manson had a very strange idea of how this would happen. He believed that it would start as a race war. And that the black people would overthrow white people, but then the black people would be unable to govern themselves. So the Manson family would step up and become the rulers. And he believed this because of what he thought were secret messages left within the songs of the Beatles, like the rock band, that he believed were giving him specifically secret messages, which is definitely a first. They call this event Helter Skelter. When it didn't start like they thought it would, they decided to take matters in their own hands. It started off when Manson shot and killed a random drug dealer. Then later, his followers kidnapped and murdered a man they tried to swindle for money. And then later, some followers actually broke into the house of an actress named Sharon Tate, who was pregnant at the time, by the way, and they murdered her along with 4 others. And then there are other murders, like a lot of other murders that were tied to the Manson family. And there's some that are theorized to be linked but can't be confirmed. Manson, as well as other members of the cult, were actually sentenced to death. But that ended up being changed a year later when California got rid of the death penalty. Which, in my opinion, especially for a lot of these people, the death penalty is probably a better fate. So I would argue that they deserve life in prison over that because, death might be mercy for them. But that's just my philosophy. Manson died in 2017, which officially marked the end of the Manson family that we know of. Also, they use drugs, but he looks like a drug user, so. This next cult is actually a very interesting one, and I'm probably going to butcher this name so bad. So please forgive me. The Nuwaubian Nation. Nuwaubian. That's what we're going to go with. It was founded in 1967 by Malachi York. That's what I'm going to go with. And it was basically to be a haven for African and indigenous people. It was originally founded in Brooklyn, but it was moved to a commune in Georgia in 1993. The group mainly believed in black supremacy, which is basically the opposite of white supremacy, as York himself described it. He said, quote, "White people are the devil. They say Nubians are not racist. Bullcrap. I am. White people are devils. Always was, always will be." Okay. And their beliefs were also kind of weird, like not like Scientology weird, but kind of weird. It was a mix of UFO ideology, Islam, and then ancient Egyptian, just like sprinkled in there, which is a very strange combination. Um, However, after moving to the compound, he would start actually revealing kind of his true nature to the people there. For one, he was big on forced labor of members. Um, and he also forced them when they moved to the commune or even joined, they had to surrender all of their assets to him and then basically work for free for him in exchange for being able to live at the commune. And of course, he was also a pedophile and sexually abusive. Uh, like a previous one we just went over, like a few points ago, he required his female members to be open access to him so he could have them whenever he wanted. And this included children, the commune. It was also classified as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center for its extremist views of like black supremacy and stuff. Um, York was actually arrested in May of 2002. Oh, oh, he was arrested in May of 2002. And like shortly thereafter, the FBI and ATF stormed the commune, and they found at least 30 firearms that were stockpiled. Halichi, he was put on trial for numerous counts of child molestation and rape, totaling to 135 years of prison. However, after this, the Nubian nation did not dissolve. And in fact, members are still protesting for York's release. And they're saying basically that he was framed and that he didn't do this and that this was a government cover up. Can't confirm or deny that, but you know. This next cult is probably one of the most disgusting ones on this list. It's called the Family International, but it's also known as the Children of God. It was founded by David Berg in 1968. I don't know why that was so slow. I hope the rest aren't that slow. And it's basically one of the biggest sex cults of all time. It was based off of a very interesting interpretation of the Bible. Of course, included doomsday, all that stuff. Very literal translation of the Bible too. And Bird was prophet, and there it is. They basically, or at least he believed, that God actually wants people to have a lot of sex because that creates a better relationship with God. Which, okay. Yeah, sure. Uh, like I said before, promoting sexual liberation is fine. But the problem comes when members are expected and are forced to have intercourse, which is like exactly what happened. Um, it was like, well, for one, I'm gonna come back to that. I'll come back to that one. It was extremely sexually abusive. Um, it like women, he would basically have like women, like female members of the cult, go out and seduce men and have sex with them, and then say, "Hey, you should join this cult if you want to have more." And they called it flirty fishing. And then again, every woman was supposed to have like their bodies completely open for anyone else. And most disgustingly, children were not just permitted to having sexual relationships and being taken advantage of, it was encouraged. Yeah. But going back to this last point, Berg also believed that even though he himself was of Jewish origins, he believed that um, Jewish people were traitors that were responsible for the death of Jesus and for the persecution of Christians. And he also saw like the FLDS leader. He saw black people as like personifications of the devil. But back to the sexual abuse. Children, especially, were abused by him, by other members, and even by the children's parents. One such a child was actually David Berg's own son, Ricky Rodriguez. He was basically abused from childhood up. And after years of withstanding this abuse, he snapped and murdered one of his molesters and then ended his own life. Which is really sad because, you know, he basically from the beginning was like exposed to this abuse and had nothing to do about it, could do nothing about it until he just snapped. Berg passed away in 1994. Unfortunately, he was never prosecuted. But he left the cult to one of his mistresses, Karen Zerby. She kind of rebranded the cult. She's actually the one who changed it from the Children of God to the Family International. And she kind of rebranded and she denounced the previous like sexual practices and pushed more to like a missionary and like service based group. And it does still exist to this day, though it seems mostly like it's based online now. And as far as we know, the sexual abuse has stopped. However, they're very secretive now, so we don't know if these horrible acts are still going on and if they're just being hidden or if they've actually just stopped. The next list on this list is the hypocrite of all hypocrites, the Alamo Christian Foundation. It was founded by Tony Alamo in 1969, and it took a very traditional evangelical kind of approach. It was just another one of those conservative evangelical groups. Um, with a bit of strange UFO ideology. I don't know, weird stuff like that. However, it's a little darker than that. For one, group was extremely anti-Catholic to the point that it ended up being classified as a hate group for being so anti-Catholic. But that's um, then also he kind of forced his members to give him free labor. Um, that they were really like unpaid and stuff, that stuff. But it really started getting bad after his wife, Susan Alamo, died. First, he had his wife embalmed and put her body on display in the commune. Then the authorities found out and actually arrested him and basically made him bury her instead of like showing her off to everyone. And so then he was like, okay, oh, I mentioned that earlier. Okay, then I'll just get remarried. Um, and basically married a bunch of people, a lot of them being underage. He basically sex trafficked them. He was also very abusive to his new wives, because they didn't like if they didn't look exactly like her, he would say that they needed to get like plastic surgery, and he was also like physically like he would abuse them and hit them. Um, Also, there was one incident in which three young boys were basically kidnapped. So their fathers had been excommunicated from the church, and their mothers basically remarried like right after, took the kids, and then just like left and dipped to California. And so like the fathers called the police, and when the police found them, the boys like they had obvious signs of abuse. Um so all these like abuse charges kind of started like stacking up, and in 2008 he was Alamo was finally arrested, and he was charged with 10 counts of taking children across the state for the purpose of sex. Across state lines for the purpose of sex. A lot of which were probably his, underage wives. He was sentenced to 175 years in prison and was actually fined $250,000. Interestingly enough, the foundation actually it still exists to this day, except they kind of forgot about all this stuff, and they kind of painted Alamo as like oh, this great guy, he founded our church because he loved God so much. Kind of forgot about all this stuff. Next on this list is the first of two examples in this project of Christian identity groups. So before I begin kind of explaining this, I want to kind of go over what a Christian identity group is. In simple terms, it's basically the belief that Aryans, or white people, were actually God's chosen people, are superior, and are the only true Christians, basically. So basically, if you put Nazism and Christianity together. They also believe that Jewish people are traitors and liars. And again, a common theme actually, black people represent the devil here on earth. We have seen, like I said, we've seen cults on this list with similar beliefs, but the difference is that Christian identity groups are both cults and hate groups at the same time. A famous example of a Christian identity group that's not on this project is the Ku Klux Klan, KKK. They were Protestant led, and a lot of, especially early on, their motives were religion based. Now let's get on to this cult, the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord, which is way too long of a name, and I'm going to shorten it to CSA. It was founded in 1970 by James Ellison, and again, it is classified as a Christian identity group. They also believed that doomsday would start because of black and Jewish people. And they kind of started like stocking up for that. And obviously, white people are superior. Obviously, this group was extremely racist. And because they feared doomsday, they started stockpiling weapons and training people to prepare for the impending apocalypse. This, of course, got the FBI's attention, and eventually, they got involved and raided the compound, found a lot of illegal weapons, which I'm going to read out some of the FBI's findings. 2 stolen trucks, 3 unidentified vehicles, and a Land Cruiser Jeep that was supplied to another Christian identity group, the Order. 155 Krugerrands, which is a South African currency, as well as numerous gold and silver coins. 1 live, light, anti-tank weapon. Numerous blades of 9 inches or longer. 94 long guns, 30 handguns, 35 machine guns / sawed-off saw guns, and 1 heavy machine gun, and 2 improvised landmines, 25 destructive devices, 40 improvised hand grenades, 320 blasting caps, 4,000 feet of detonating cord, about 50 sticks of dynamite, 38 explosives, kinetic explosives, 3.5 blocks of C4 explosives, a safety fuse, military trip flares, smoke grenades, black powder, smokeless powder, and several 100,000 rounds of ammunition. So they got into a bit of trouble for that. And also because they reportedly helped some other Christian identity groups. But they got in so much trouble that the FBI actually ended up labeling them as a domestic terrorist group. Next, we have another cult with a long name, the Church of the Firstborn of the Lamb of God, which I will shorten to CFBLG. It was founded by Ervil LeBaron after a disagreement between him and his brother, Joel LeBaron. The beliefs of this cult are actually kind of similar to the FLDS that was discussed earlier, including Mormon fundamentalism and polygamy. This guy had multiple wives, many of which are underage. But what sets this apart from some of these other fundamentalist polygamist groups were the multiple murders he ordered. The first was on his own brother, who I mentioned earlier, Joel LeBaron. Then he targeted some rival polygamist leaders and defectors. And he also ordered the murder of his own daughter, Rebecca LeBaron, after she threatened to leave the group and expose all its wrongdoings. Um, most devastatingly was he launched an attack and basically destroyed a small community called Los Molinos in hopes, because he thought that his youngest brother was hiding there, and he hoped they would flush him out. His younger brother, Verlin LeBaron, who had taken over the church that Joel LeBaron previously ran before he was killed. I know this is kind of convoluted with all the LeBarons. Just bear with me. In 1979, Ervil LeBaron was finally arrested and sentenced to life in prison. However, the killings did not stop because he left a list, basically a hit list, of the people he wanted dead for his followers to finish. He ended up passing away in prison in 1981, which finally marked the end of his reign of terror. Next is, in my opinion, probably one of the most tragic cults on this list, Heaven's Gate. It was founded by Marshall Applewhite in 1974. Well, Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles, 1974. They believed that God was an alien who was going to come back for them at the end of times and save them from eternal punishment by picking them up in their spaceship. To kind of give a better idea of their beliefs, I actually have these initiation tapes that were posted to YouTube by Occult Demon Cassette. I'm only going to play like the first minute or so just so you can kind of get an idea.
Why is Amazon paying me $60?
Sorry about that.
Classroom, or in old language a couple thousand years ago, disciples. Those who are trying to prepare themselves for entry into the evolutionary level above human, synonymous with the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven. We're going to talk to you about the most urgent thing that is on our mind, and what we suspect is the most urgent thing on the minds of those who will connect with us. We'll title this tape Planet Earth About to be Recycled. Your only chance to evacuate is to leave with us.
Yeah. And they really believe this. And things kind of went downhill after Bonnie Nettles died, passed away. But before that, some other things about this cult is that members were expected to have the same haircuts, wear the same clothes, and do the same things, like everything the same every day. They kind of saw Applewhite as their prophet who would help them reach heaven. When Bonnie Nettles died, she died in 1985, the cult kind of shifted its views. It stopped believing that it was their bodies that would be picked up by God, but their souls. So, in 1997, when the comet known as Hale-Bopp began to pass Earth, all 39 members, including Applewhite, committed suicide. And in order to understand what they were thinking at that time, we can look at the final message left by Applewhite on the Heaven's Gate website, which is still up to this day, right before their suicide. Whether Hale-Bopp has a companion or not is irrelevant from our perspective. However, its arrival is joyously very significant to us at Heaven's Gate. The joy is that our older member in the evolutionary level above human, the Kingdom of Heaven, has made it clear to us that Hale-Bopp's approach is the marker we've been waiting for. The time for the arrival of the spacecraft from the level above human to take us home to their world in the literal heavens. Our 22 years of classroom here on planet Earth is finally coming to conclusion. Graduation from the human evolutionary level. We are happily prepared to leave this world and go with T's crew. If you study the material on this website, you will hopefully understand our joy and what our purpose here on Earth has been. You may even find your boarding pass to leave with us during this brief window. We are so very thankful that we have been recipients of this opportunity to prepare for membership in their kingdom and to experience their boundless caring and nurturing. Applewhite. And the true tragedy, I think, of this cult is the fact that it was so genuine. Other leaders mentioned throughout this list have been easy to make fun of or be mad about because it's clear from the start that they had bad intentions. Whether they wanted money or to fulfill their gross fantasies or just for the thrill of having that power, it's clear that they had ulterior motives. But when you read through his writings and when you watch this video, yeah, he looks crazy, but you can tell that he believes in this. He genuinely believes this is true. When I look at this, I see a man who clearly had some sort of mental issues and who had convinced himself and managed to convince others of this story of this god or whatever. And in recruiting these members, it also reinforced the fact that this was true, even if it wasn't. And eventually just got to a point where they just believed. They just believed this was true. And it's really easy to look at these beliefs and say, that's crazy. Why would you think that? But you have to remember that for many of these people, this was the hope that they needed. They needed this hope, this guarantee that they were going to go to the good place. And that's why a lot of people fall for these cults. Moving on from that, we get to our second Christian identity group. This one, a bit more infamous than the last one. And of course, I'm referring to the Aryan Nations, founded in 1978 by Richard Butler. It was very similar beliefs to the CSA. Aryan people were, God's chosen people, and non-white people were going to go to hell. However, unlike the CSA, the Aryan Nations was much more vocal about it. They had an annual World Congress. They teamed up with other Christian identity groups, and Butler himself, he openly worshipped Hitler. So it's pretty obvious why they're kind of controversial. But beyond that, members were also very violent. One member actually, shot and killed a state trooper. Another one was arrested. He fired a hit on an FBI agent. In 1998, another member shot more than 70 rounds of a machine gun into a Jewish community, which wounded 5 people. And then he drove off and shot and killed a Filipino postal worker as well. There was also another incident in which a mother and son were assaulted by security guards from the Aryan Nation's compound after their car backfired, which the security guards misinterpreted as a gunshot. And the Southern Poverty Law Center actually sued Butler on the victims' behalf, and the victims were awarded a $6.6 million settlement, and $4.8 million of the dollars of that had to be paid by Richard Butler for his role in it. And this actually forced Butler to file bankruptcy, so he had to get rid of his compound. But it's okay, because one of his wealthy members bought a house for him. Unfortunately, he was never actually arrested and, like, charged, despite the fact that he was connected to so many violent crimes. And he ended up dying in his sleep in 2004. But by that point, the group had already lost a lot of its influence and had already begun to splinter. And it mostly dissolved after his death. Shortly thereafter, there was a revival, the Aryan Nations Revival Group that was formed. But it was dissolved in 2010. But many splinter groups that formed from the Aryan Nation and its revival do still exist to this day, and shows that hate still does run rampant in the United States. And yeah, it's a designated hate group. Duh. Next is the House of Yahweh from 1980. Now, this one, I will be honest, is a bit more obscure than some of these other ones, and it was a bit more difficult to find research, so please bear with me. It was founded by, and I'm gonna butcher this name again, Yisrael Hawkins in 1980. It was a mix of Christianity and Judaism with a very literal interpretation of the Bible, like everything happened the way it was said. It was also a doomsday cult, and Hawkins actually had multiple predictions that of when doomsday would be, and they all failed. Like, none of them came true, obviously. And now this is where things start kind of getting complicated. Former members say that he practiced polygamy. However, Hawkins and other members denied it. He was brought onto charges for polygamy in 2008, but was acquitted. So, and then he was also brought into charges for child labor, but was basically just given like a slap on the wrist for that. However, probably the kind of iffiest thing are the two deaths that occurred in like this cult. The first one was in 2003. A child died after her mother and another cult member attempted to perform surgery on her, like without a doctor or anything, just by themselves. And then in 2006, a woman ended up bleeding to death after giving birth because she wasn't allowed to go to the hospital. Hawkins died in 2021, but the cult still exists to this day. Next on this list is, oh god, and I'm gonna butcher this name. I'm so sorry. Rajneeshpuram. I'm gonna go with that. And it was founded, and again, I'm so sorry because I'm gonna butcher this name. It was founded by Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. I'm sorry if I butchered that name. And what's different about this one is that it was technically founded in India, but it was moved to Oregon in the United States, and that's where its main commune was. It was a blend of Eastern and Western spirituality and a big focus on like individualism. They also rejected all like traditional establishments such as like marriage, the government, traditional churches, all that stuff. Thousands of people actually lived on this commune, and things were actually going great. Like, they were relatively prosperous. The issue is that they were so prosperous that they ended up kind of basically infiltrating a local small town. Because of the just like influx of people moving into the commune. And obviously, the locals were not happy about that. And this caused a lot of tension. In 1994, Rajneesh, he decided to have some of his members run for a local election that year. And he wanted to make sure, I guess they wanted to make sure that these members would win. So a group of members put salmonella cultures that they had been growing into the salad bars of different restaurants, like in the town. This caused over 700 people to get sick, 45 of whom were hospitalized. And they were hoping that this would keep people from going and voting, but this actually just made like the people there so pissed that they went in like record amounts to go vote against these people. And at the same time, investigators started investigating the commune because it was linked back to them, and it was found that it wasn't just the salmonella cultures that they were experimenting with. There were other bacteria and also poisonous chemicals like that they were experimenting with, specifically for things, for opportunities like this. And it technically wasn't Rajneesh who was doing this. It was two other like higher up members. However, Rajneesh knew about this and did nothing to stop it. So he was arrested and basically deported back to India, where he actually spent the rest of his life in an ashram, which is basically a religious like site where you go live. And it wasn't really too horrible for him, but and then he died in 1990. And this right here was one of the biggest bioterrorism attacks on U.S. soil, second only to the anthrax attacks in 2001. This next cult is probably one of the strangest on this list. It's called the Church of Euthanasia. It was founded by Chris Korda in 1992. And as the name suggests, the church believed that the human population needed to be just significantly reduced. Its 4 pillars that it like lived based on was suicide, abortion, cannibalism, and sodomy. Members also pledge not to procreate ever, and while not forced, they are kind of encouraged to commit suicide. And so it's kind of obvious why this cult might be controversial, but I would say probably the worst part about it is the fact that it has on its website step-by-step guides on how to commit suicide. So if like someone with like depression or a mental illness were to stumble upon the website, they may see it and actually go through with it. So that's my biggest complaint about the site. It's really doubles as a environmental activism group. Chris Korda was actually a big environmental activist, and it's kind of believed that this is less of a cult and more of a public stance, even though it claims to have thousands of members. However, it's unclear how many members are still remain as part of the church, because even Corda herself has kind of moved away from this cult and has actually started producing music and stuff. But I mean, definitely a strange one. So next we have, this is the last one of the 20th century, and it's I'm just gonna say NXIVM. There's another way to say it, but you know what? I don't respect this cult enough to say it properly. It was founded in 1989 by Keith Raniere, and it's yet another sex cult. It actually originally advertised itself as a self-help group, but it's a lot more gross than that. Within this group was actually a secret society called DOS, DOS. And basically, the way it worked was that there was a inner group of women, about 8 women, who were had a personal relationship with Raniere. And Raniere is the center of it. And then these 8 women would go out, and these 8 women, they were called slaves, right? They would go out and find other women to recruit, who would then be their slaves, and then those slaves would go out and recruit other women to be their slaves, and it would just go on and on and on. But the man in charge of it all was Raniere. And again, these women, they basically had to have their bodies open access, and they're also sex trafficked and pressured to having sex. And also, he would have them send inappropriate pictures of themselves, basically as blackmail, to ensure that they wouldn't try and leave and go get help or something. And probably really gross as well is the fact that each woman would have their Raniere's initials branded into their skin with hot iron. He also, of course, he abused his members psychologically and and emotionally, and making them feel trapped and they were unable to leave. At least one of his victims was underage when the abuse started, at only 15 at the time. Thankfully, this piece of shit, he was arrested in 2019 and sentenced to 120 years of prison. He was charged with racketeering, attempted racketeering, sex trafficking, attempted sex trafficking conspiracy, forced labor conspiracy, and wire fraud conspiracy. I chose to add his mugshot here because I want you to feel kind of proud knowing that this guy is currently rotting in a prison cell for the rest of his life. But this also kind of goes to show you should never trust a women's self-help group that is run by a man. And this is exactly why. Moving into the 21st century is Angel's Landing in 2001. It was founded by Lou Castro, but that's actually his fake name. His real name is actually Daniel Perez, but for the sake of not making this confusing, we're just going to call him Lou Castro. He told his followers that he was a 1,000-year-old angel who actually needed access to, I hate to say this, he needed regular access to young girls in order to stay alive. And by access, I mean access. It's gross. his members actually lived in a commune, and they actually lived like a life of luxury. Like they had nice stuff, and they were like rich, and they got allowances and stuff. And you may be wondering, how he managed to afford all of this. And it's because of um, all of the um, magical like just deaths that just happened, like conveniently after members would um, surrender their life insurance policies to him, and then like suddenly like accidentally, they would die. It was crazy. Um, and Castro was able to just get the life insurance payouts. One of the accidental deaths, and this is one of many, was that of Patricia Hughes, who lived in the commune at the time. For years, it was believed that she had died from an accidental drowning in the commune's pool. But then one day, one of the girls, who was 11 at the time of her death, basically came forward and revealed that when she was 11, when she was that age, she heard like splashing and screaming. And before seeing Castro, who was like wet and out of breath, and Castro told her to tell the police that she saw Hughes fall into the pool as an accident, which she did because she was 11. But her coming forward was like the final piece of evidence that police need to finally like arrest him. And he received 2 life sentences as well as 33 years for his crimes, with no parole. These charges included first-degree murder, rape, other sexual crimes, falsifying documents, and aggravated assault. And once again, I put a picture of him in like a prison uniform, because again, I want you to feel proud knowing that he is going to rot in his cell for the rest of his life. And now it is time for our final cult. Love Has Won in 2008. It began when the founder, Amy Carlson, left her husband and family because she wanted to pursue spiritual awakening. She moved into a house with other spiritually awakened people, but she quickly rose as their leader, earning the nickname of Mother, and starting Love Has Won. This cult was based on astrology, Western spirituality, and even reincarnation, because Carlson said she had been reincarnated over 500 times, including she was a reincarnation of Jesus, Joan of Arc, and Marilyn Monroe, just to name a few. Yeah. However, former members of this cult actually came out and talked about how she was really abusive too, how she was a huge like alcoholic and drug addict, and when she was under the influence, she would become super abusive. There was actually a video, and I haven't found it yet, where she reportedly yelled at one of the other members and like berated them because they brought her meatballs instead of chicken parmesan. But this, and I'm about to tell you guys, this is a really funny story. There was also an incident when her and her followers decided they were going to move to Hawaii. And when they were discovered, the locals, like, they were, like, pissed off. And they, like, started, like, protesting, like, right outside, like, the house they got. And so Carlson, being the smart woman she was, decided that she was going to tell them that she was actually the reincarnation of an ancient Hawaiian deity known as Pili, which only pissed off the locals like even more. And they had no choice. They had to flee, basically, and go back to Colorado. So they were kicked out of Hawaii. And then the biggest controversy and the craziest thing, like, from this cult happened in April of 2021, where Carlson's mummified corpse was found in a sleeping bag covered in fairy lights, glitter, and essential oils. Members had apparently kept her there as like a shrine to worship, and her body had been there for anywhere from a few weeks to months based on her autopsy. Her cause of death was likely a combination of her alcoholism, anorexia, and the colloidal silver supplements she had been taking, which were actually really toxic. 7 members of the cult were arrested for their role in handling her body. You know, you kind of can't just keep a corpse in your bedroom. The cult itself ended up rebranding into 5D Full Disclosure, where they actually still worship Carlson as mother, and claim that she is ascended beyond the earth. And that draws a close to this presentation. This was definitely, great to do research on, and it brought me down some rabbit holes, made me learn some things that maybe I didn't want to learn. Would I recommend making a YouTube video like I did? Absolutely not. It's not worth it. But I've come this far. So, it's been a great semester though. And I hope that this is a good project and I didn't bore you to death.